The Celestials are one of Jack Kirby's most fascinating contributions to the Marvel Universe, and it's a long list. The enigmatic alien space gods, more modular robot than Greco-Roman deity, entered relatively late in Marvel's Bronze Age as part of Kirby's Eternals, but have subsequently been integrated heavily into the fabric and foundations of all of Marvel's shared universe. As the Celestials' role expands in the MCU and Marvel's current Judgment Day event, it's an interesting time to consider how they've connected to mutants and the X-Men, and what those connections tell us about stories to come. In this episode, I'll answer, did the Celestials create mutants? Why does it matter? Are any mutants closely connected to the Celestials, and what did these connections tell us? And much, much more. Hey everybody, I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of comicbookherald.com. You're listening to Krakin Krakoa here on the Comic Book Herald YouTube channel. If you like the CBH YouTube channel or Krakin Krakoa, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, and commenting. All that stuff helps me out a great deal. You can find full X-Men and comic book reading orders over on comicbookherald.com with links in the show notes. Some mild spoilers for Discuss Comics may follow. First things first, there's a strong textual case to be made that the Celestials did in fact create mutants. This is not a part of Kirby's original design for the Celestials, in which they are responsible for the creation of the Eternals, Deviants, and Humans. Of course, a big part of that is that Kirby's Eternal series was clearly written without Marvel Universe continuity in mind, to the point that when editorially mandated to cross over, Kirby just put a guy in a thing mask, rather than including the ever-loving Blue Eyes himself. It wasn't until a few years later, in the backup pages of What If of all places, that longtime writer and editor and continuity master Mark Gruenwald synchronized Kirby's Celestials with the existing landscape of Marvel Cosmic. If you're interested in Eternals, Deviant, and Celestial history, the Gruenwald narrative is basically the historical text, including a seemingly tossed-aside line concerning the X gene. In What If number 23, Mark Gruenwald shows the Celestial first host showing up to Earth, creating Eternals and Deviants. We see specific roles of various Celestials, including Oneg the Prober, that nickname must have been hell in high school, who gives a latent gene to the pre-human experiments. Quote, the legacy of Oneg might enable mankind to surpass the genetic achievements of its fellow subspecies, and on that day the Celestials will be in attendance. Through various lenses, this can and has been read as creating mutants, or at least creating the conditions for mutants. It's fair here to wonder, okay, so what? Celestials, nuclear radiation, a biblical god, what difference does it make who made them? In terms of the grand Marvel tapestry, Gruenwald's telling puts future mutants firmly in the Celestial plan that previously focused on Eternals and Deviants, and implies that the day they surpass mankind is of such note the Celestials would return to Earth. This is a tremendous rarity and a big deal. In storytelling terms, it means things like the MCU explaining the rise of mutants as the work of Celestials could work and have grounding in the source material. Likewise, it ties the X-Men franchise to one of the coolest elements of Marvel Cosmic, which isn't such a bad addition when you consider the all the time the Krakoan X-Men have spent and are going to spend as a galactic power player. Now, in more recent years, Jason Aaron and Emma Guinness's Avengers extended this impact so that the accident of a Celestial crashing and dying on Earth set up the primordial ingredients that made Earth's superpowered population, not just mutants, but everyone, possible. I kind of personally prefer intelligent design from robots with fun names compared to the Avengers happened because an alien barfed on our planet. Maybe that's just me. The most prominent Celestial connections in the world of X-Men come through Apocalypse, the longtime survival of the fittest villain, overlord of the Age of Apocalypse, Big Daddy A of Krakoa, and current family man in the land of Amenth. Fabian Nicieza reached back to Apocalypse's connections to Celestial technology in his mid-aughts series Cable and Deadpool, and you regularly see it today as part of the character's bio. It is well understood at this point that he is a mutant, transformed by alien Celestial technology, but how did we get there? How did we walk to that point? The first comic connecting Apocalypse to the Celestials comes in a sort of backhanded way through his debut in X-Factor by Luis and Walt Simonson. During the fall, the Mutants crossover and X-Factor's first real showdown with Apocalypse were introduced to his alien ship, a massive vessel of otherworldly technology and artificial intelligence. If you're wondering what to call it, X-Factor named it Ship. Never let it be said that Cyclops and Jean Grey and Warren Worthington III are vanilla. About 20 issues later, starting in X-Factor number 43, Louise Simonson fully connected the dots on Ship's alien origins and brought X-Factor and Ship face to face with the Celestials in the story known as Judgement War. To my knowledge, this is the first real contact X-Men ever had with Celestials, including such wonderful moments as Cyclops shooting a Celestial's foot to try and keep from getting stomped, and after realizing that wouldn't work, burrowing a tunnel into the alien planet to hide well underground. There's not much conversation in this saga about Celestial's role in creating mutants specifically, although Simonson does absolutely mirror Kirby's vision of the Celestials returning in host to judge civilization. It's actually quite interesting to me here to see them doing it with an alien race as opposed to our vaunted Special Earth 616, right? So Cyclops, Jean, Iceman, Beast, and Archangel all would have been exposed to the planet-demolishing might of the Celestials in late 80s X-Men continuity. But back to Apocalypse, the most deliberate Celestial connection by Simonson is that ship was created by the Celestials, and that Apocalypse merely found and tamed the vessel. This is a deeply underrated connection we take for granted now that it's well established and supported, but this was a really inventive, cool way for Simonson to connect one of her co-creations, Apocalypse, to the legacy of Jack Kirby and Marvel Cosmic. The fact that this story still isn't even uploaded into Marvel Unlimited tells you just how under the radar it has gone all these many years later. From there, creators like Fabian Nicieza cemented the ties between Apocalypse and the Celestials in works like X-Force number 37 in the early 90s, and later revisiting it in Cable and Deadpool. It becomes this deeply unique and crucial augmentation for Apocalypse, where Ensaba Nur is both an ancient, intensely powerful mutant committed to growing mutant strength at all costs, but one who is also indebted to and enhanced by the ultimate alien technology of the Celestials. Before uncovering this celestial technology, we do see Apocalypse shown in Jonathan Hickman and Dustin Weaver's Shield without armor. After he uncovers the tech, though, primarily shown in the pages of Rise of Apocalypse, a 1996 miniseries, he wears celestial armor and becomes capable of resurrection through the ages, which is a big deal, right? It allows for this sort of Eternal-esque life for Apocalypse. To me, one of the most interesting questions is how much Apocalypse understands of the Celestials and his use of their technology. In Blood of the Apocalypse, circa X-Men number 182 to 187, we see Apocalypse draw on celestial plans for his flying Sphinx. He upgrades from ship to a Sphinx. He has a little Sphinx inside of a bigger Sphinx, I guess to connect to his cultural roots. Of course, much bigger than that. At the end of the event, this is also the one where Apocalypse makes Polaris his pestilence and Gambit his death, a Celestial speaks directly to Apocalypse. The scene, which I should mention has not been referenced since, asserts the Celestials expect Apocalypse to fulfill his end of a contract in return for using their tech, which feels a bit like demanding payment from a neighbor for an old piece of furniture you left on the curb for anyone to take, but hey, they're Celestials, they're mysterious. Again, to my knowledge, no one has ever done anything with Apocalypse owing the Celestials a favor, but the fact that they had a direct conversation, and it could come up, puts Apocalypse in the top 1% of Terrans that have ever communicated directly with the Celestials. One of my favorite underrated Apocalypse stories, and honestly one of the most interesting in terms of the character's relationship to Celestials, comes in the Peter David written 1996 Incredible Hulk 455 to 457. These issues are especially interesting to me because they offer a semi-rare glimpse into the thought Apocalypse has put into how to manage when the Celestials return. Apocalypse anticipates the return of a celestial host and is desperate enough to turn to a non-mutant, in this case Hulk, to leverage any power that might help him defeat and claim the power of the Celestials for himself. The fascinating implication here is that well before Blood of Apocalypse, Big Daddy A has an understanding of celestial hosts and is taking action to make their power his own. Apocalypse in this story makes Hulk his new war, complete with a Punisher crotch design costume that I'm guessing was the work of Kate Pryde as fashion designer, also as a dope sword and wrist whip weapons platter. Apocalypse tests his War Hulk out. To do this, he brings in, of course, the unstoppable Juggernaut, who is promptly stopped and tossed around like a chump. Inevitably, Hulk breaks free from Apocalypse's control in 3 issues, but Apocalypse seems pretty satisfied with the test and what it means for handling the Celestials' return. Not for nothing, this is the second time we've seen reference to Judgment Day, the first in Fall of the Mutants with the arrival of Ship. Also not for nothing, we still haven't seen Hulk in the pages of the 2022 Judgment Day event. The other mutant with the closest ties to Celestials is one Dr. Nathaniel Essex, aka Mr. Sinister. In 1859, Apocalypse uses celestial tech to turn Essex into Sinister. This is in the pages of the further adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix. So, like Apocalypse, Sinister's abilities and form is heavily tied to the legacy of Celestials. This almost never came up until at least 2011. In Kieran Gillen's written 2011 Uncanny X-Men, Mr. Sinister hijacks a Celestial, the Dreaming Celestial. He particularly uses the head of that Celestial, transforms it into his own visage, and uses it to power his resurrection engines, his sinister systems in Everything is Sinister. In addition to formulating the modern reinvention of Sinister, seriously, the first 3 issues of this run are a masterclass in reinventing a villain. The Utopia-era X-Men, the San Fran X-Men, come into direct conflict with the Celestials, and it gives characters like Magneto an opportunity to get intimately acquainted with Celestial tech, as he uses his abilities to hold the Dreaming Celestial together for an extended period of time to avoid massive destruction. The Celestials are alerted to Sinister's desecration of one of their own. They fly to Earth and make a real show of things, but they hilariously just fly home after Cyclops gives them the stern talking to, kind of an inspirational speech. 2004 to 2014 really did wonders for Cyc's cool guy phase reputation. Tying back to X-Factor's run-in during the Judgment War, Cyclops and X-Factor do actually have a history here of beating down Celestials. A particular favorite of mine is when Arishem goes to judge the alien planet, and Cyc blasts his hand off before he can turn his thumb in either direction. Good or bad. I have to double down on this too because it's so cool. Somehow Jean infuses Cyclops' optic blast with the power of the Phoenix. Don't ask too many questions here, that's not the point. He blasts Arishem's hand off, and then the Celestials just up and go home. In terms of things I love, it's like 1, my wife and kids, 2, Alex Caruso and Lonzo Ball and the Bulls, and 3, this moment. For my money, the hardest mutant celestial connections to reconcile all come from basically everything Rick Remender did in the pages of Uncanny X-Force and later Uncanny Avengers. I love this X-Force run to death, but its take on Apocalypse and Celestials is unsupported by virtually anything else in comics that has come since. But since Marvel is all about taking lost and forgotten continuity ephemera and making it work, this could easily come up again in the future and could be pretty interesting. In effect, Remender and team tell us that the Mantle of Apocalypse is a legacy title, and that, I quote, Apocalypse is one in a long line of beings selected by the Celestials. This, of course, being pre-Arakko and Ten of Swords, Remender's explanation for Apocalypse's ethos of survival of the fittest is that he's caretaking evolution on behalf of the Celestials. Honestly, it kind of makes sense and is a pretty interesting take. The run shows Archangel as the next in the line of the Celestials' chosen Apocalypse, and even has some pretty direct interaction between Warren and the Dreaming Celestial. A lot is made in these stories of Celestial life and Death Siege, which do indeed have ties to Jack Kirby's original conception of the Celestials in the pages of Eternals. For all intents and purposes, though, in Remender's hands, a Death Seed allows for transformation into the next Apocalypse, which is what we see Archangel go through, of course, in the very famous and very good Dark Angel saga. Post-Uncanny X-Force, we actually see a direct attempt at this transformation as Nemesis, aka the artist formerly known as Holocaust, aka the Age of Apocalypse son of Big Daddy A, is given a Death Seed by a Celestial Gardener and is fully prepared to ascend to the new Apocalypse of the Marvel Universe. Or at least he would have if King and the Apocalypse Twins, aka the children of Archangel and Death, hadn't busted in and assassinated the Celestial with Thor's old axe, like the Celestial was not but a common president. Comics are good. From what I've read, the only other comics to really engage with this concept are the 2013 Extermination crossover, not to be confused with the pre-House of X Extermination 5-issue maxi series. Who could make that mistake? Much like Uncanny X-Force, Extermination plays a lot in the remnants of the Age of Apocalypse and deals with various ascensions to Apocalypse after the defeat of the original Big Daddy A, ultimately building to Age of Apocalypse Jean Grey in the process of becoming the next Apocalypse and receiving the Death Seed. Likewise, the premise for the event is Dark Beast and AOA Nightcrawler using the Dreaming Celestial to power a jump back to the AOA reality, which causes a hole in the multiverse, allowing previously caged threats to escape. But, the general idea here is it's really Celestial heavy. In addition, Extermination also plays with multiversal discovery of Celestial mythology, including the creation of Death Seeds, the Horde, and the entire multiverse itself. Again, it's a reminder that although we often think of the mutants and Celestials as divided aspects of the Marvel Universe, there are these moments of extreme intimacy and closeness between the franchises. It's also an instance where Celestials and Celestial-sized problems are uniquely mutant adventures, despite their threats to the entire multiverse. This is why if you accept the Remenderian interpretation of Apocalypse, Celestials and mutants are just as closely connected as Celestials, Eternals, and Deviants. I guarantee this stone will not be left unturned for too long. Speaking of, clearly, there are a number of interesting connections creators can make between mutants and Celestials. Certainly, for my money, it reinforces my belief that we are very likely to see Apocalypse during the back half of 2022's Judgment Day event. He was literally planning for the return of the Celestials. He owes them a favor, apparently, and he still supports or uses They're enhancements. These characters are closely connected. To have an event that features the X-Men heavily, that is focused heavily on the Celestials, and to not involve Apocalypse in any capacity, that doesn't feel quite right, does it? There you have it, the connections between mutants and Celestials. Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks especially to those of you who support Comic Book Herald over on Patreon. You can support the site and channel here at patreon.com/comicbookherald. In particular, thanks to the mysterious benefactors. We got Jesse W., Adam, Joshua Bentley, Triad91, Terranort, Pinball Drew, Mike Solomons, Matt Mahoney, Chris Murvica. Thanks for being mysterious benefactors of Comic Book Herald. I'm Dave. You can find all my stuff at comicbookherald.com, at Comic Book Herald, on Twitter and Instagram primarily. Look for the Best Comics Ever or Comic Book Herald podcast for the series of interviews I do with comics creators. And of course, you can check out the My Marvel This Year podcast for our read through the complete history of Marvel Universe. If you want to join a reading club like that, check out My Marvel This Year. Thanks everybody for listening, and as always, enjoy the comics.